The moment Jasmine Crockett silenced Congress. Imagine walking into a room where millions of dollars meant to help children breathe have just vanished into thin air, where a man with cold eyes and a thick folder is calling it fiscal responsibility. Now imagine you're the only person in that room who knows the real cost, because you've seen the kids sleeping with inhalers wrapped in washcloths, the mothers boiling brown water while watching commercials about progress. That's exactly what happened when Jasmine Crockett faced off against Lee Zeldin in a congressional hearing. That would change everything. And what she did next, it didn't just silence a room, it awakened a nation. The setup, a chamber ready to explode. The hearing chamber pulsed like a ticking bomb. This wasn't your typical boring policy debate where politicians read from scripts while everyone checks their phones. This was War Over America's Soul, broadcast live to over 10 million viewers. Congress had called an emergency session to confront something explosive, sudden, sweeping cuts to environmental funding that had already shuttered air monitoring stations, paused clean water projects, and left vulnerable communities gasping for breath. Into this charged atmosphere walked Lee Zeldin, eyes cold as winter, carrying a folder thick with charts and accusations. He didn't come to answer questions. He came to end what he called the Green Slush Fund, and anyone defending it. He took his seat like a prosecutor preparing for an execution, jaw locked, ready to strike. Across the aisle sat Jasmine Crockett. No entourage, no fanfare, just her notepad, a highlighter, and one photo taped inside, a sick child from Houston whose school air filter was shut down when the budget vanished. She wasn't there for headlines. She was there for justice. And under those blinding lights of national broadcast, the real battle was about to begin. Round 1, Zeldin's data assault. Zeldin leaned into his microphone, and his first words cut through the tension like a blade. Let me be perfectly clear. I terminated a fraud. I ended the mass burning of taxpayer dollars under the false banner of saving the planet. Every camera adjusted focus. Every phone stopped scrolling. His voice wasn't just righteous. It was surgical. He wasn't trying to persuade. He was here to prosecute. Behind him, a massive screen flickered to life with his first slide. Environmental grant allocations, fiscal year 2022 to 2023. Rows of numbers highlighted like warning lights. Green for grants issued, yellow for those in process, and red, bold, flashing red, for every project marked incomplete or flagged. $2.1 million, Zeldin said, dragging his finger over the figure like a scalpel across skin, for a solar training center in New Mexico that never trained a single worker. Not one. The building's foundation wasn't even poured. He moved to the next item without blinking. $850,000 for a compost startup in Ohio, run out of a single-family home by the nephew of a state delegate. No product, no output, no accountability. Then came the kill shot. $5 million wired for community air tracking. Sounds good, right? Except there isn't a single working sensor. The contractor went bankrupt. The money vanished. No explanation, no audit. The committee room was dead quiet. Even the photographers stopped clicking. These aren't investments, Zeldin whispered, his voice dropping to almost nothing. They're favors. Vote-buying machines disguised as environmental programs. The storm gathers. Crockett rises. While Zeldin had been lighting up spreadsheets, Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still. Not in shock, not in defiance. In something far more dangerous. Preparation. Because while he had receipts, she had aftermath. She had the children in Houston whose schools now smelled of mold. The mothers in Michigan boiling water because filtration projects were halted mid-phase. The workers in the Bronx whose asthma clinics were shuttered when grants expired. Zeldin had the data. Crockett had the damage. And she knew there's a difference between waste and war. When she finally stood, the leather chair creaked faintly. But she didn't rush. No dramatic flourish. No papers slammed on desks. Just presence, measured, restrained, undeniable. She placed both palms gently on the wooden desk. Fingers spread, breathing steady. Then came her opening line. You cut the funding. I come from the place that used to live on it. The counterstrike, when truth meets power. Her voice was low, controlled, but razor sharp. I come from a community where kids don't run outside after school because the air burns when they breathe, where families boil brown tap water while watching TV commercials about progress. She paused, eyes narrowing, not in anger, but in resolve. You talk about audits? Let me give you one. A 7-year-old in South Dallas collapsed on the school track because air monitors hadn't been serviced in 8 months. A housing project in Baton Rouge still has black mold growing to the vents because the grant meant to clean it up was frozen in committee. Then she reached into her folder and pulled out a photograph, wrinkled, folded at the corner. A little girl standing outside a red brick building with peeling paint, an oxygen tank strapped to her side. She didn't ask for politics, Jasmine said, her voice tight now. She asked for air. The silence that followed wasn't passive. It was paralyzing, the kind that forces you to stare inward. You keep calling it fraud, she continued. Where I'm from, we call it survival. And when you tore the lifeline from us, you didn't just cut waste, you cut breathing. The visual war, images that shattered denial. But Crockett wasn't done. She turned her screen toward the room and began the surgical unraveling of Zeldin's narrative. First image, an aerial photo of St. Bernard Parish in Louisiana. Streets flooded not from storm surge, but from a broken water system. 3,000 families lost access to clean water when your cuts pulled the plug. Some are still bathing with bottled water. Next, a map of the Bronx shaded in toxic orange. PS 145. Home to 400 children, all diagnosed with moderate to severe asthma. The air quality station was decommissioned 3 months ago. 2 kids were hospitalized during recess last week. Their parents didn't even know the monitors were gone. Then the devastating split screen, one of Zeldin's slides showing non-essential green spending next to a real photo from collapsed mangrove barrier, a firefighter wading through waist-high water, carrying an elderly woman. She let the image breathe, the silence crushed. These aren't just numbers, she whispered. They're neighborhoods, families, children who now sleep with inhalers under their pillows because someone decided their zip code didn't return enough votes. The bombshell, the whistleblower file. Just when it seemed the room might return to equilibrium, Crockett reached for one last document. The air snapped taut like a live wire. She held it differently this time, like evidence in a courtroom, the kind that changes everything. EPA Whistleblower File 11G per restricted access. This document was handed to me by someone who had everything to lose, she said. They've worked in the EPA for 14 years, overseen 3 administrations, and last month they walked into my office with trembling hands and said, "I can't be silent anymore." She read aloud. Reallocation of public climate infrastructure funds approved under discretionary authority to be redirected toward privately owned innovation centers in alignment with strategic legislative partnerships. A murmur broke out. Someone in the back audibly whispered, "Oh my God!" Not only were these funds diverted, Crockett continued, they were never intended to return. The communities that were defunded had no warning, no option to reapply, no notification at all. Her eyes swept the room, locking with each lawmaker's gaze. We were told there was a shortage, that there wasn't enough to go around. That's not true. She turned sharply toward Zeldin. It was never a lack of money. It was money sent the wrong way. The final question that changed everything. Crockett stepped toward the central microphone like someone walking into the heart of a storm she'd already survived. She looked directly into the camera, straight into the homes of millions watching. If a budget doesn't protect the most vulnerable, she said, each word weighed like something sacred, then who exactly is it serving? She turned a page on her notepad, revealing a single name, Angela Medina. She was a single mother, lived with her 2 boys half a mile from an open-air chemical disposal site. That community asked for one thing, a real-time air monitoring station. Not a favor, not a luxury, just a way to know when the air might be trying to kill them. Her voice began to break, not from weakness, but from memory. It got approved. For 3 weeks, the foundation was poured. Then the funding was cut. Angela went back to boiling water and sleeping with windows taped shut. She showed a medical bill, half folded and annotated in red pen. Her youngest, Noah, has been hospitalized 4 times this year. He's 8. He sleeps with his inhaler wrapped in a washcloth so it doesn't get lost. Then came the line that leveled the room. She didn't ask for politics. She asked for air. Her voice broke completely. People don't need a speech about data. They need to live. The standing ovation that shook Washington. Something rare happened. The sound of it scraping marble as one Republican senator pushed back his chair and stood slowly, respectfully. Then another, then 3 more. One clapped, soft at first, uncertain, but then came the ripple. The sound became steady, defiant, unified. The hearing room, once divided by party lines, now moved as one body. Even those who'd come in hostile stood. Not because they agreed with Crockett's politics, but because something bigger than politics had just taken the floor. She didn't acknowledge the applause. She stood still, refusing to let go of the moment, because this wasn't victory. It was a cry for help. Zeldin's hollow response. When Lee Zeldin finally rose, it wasn't with triumph but with something fragile, the need to reclaim control. Gone was the sharp precision from his opening. Now there was hesitation. Wait. I will be reviewing every single project impacted by the restructuring decisions, he said, voice slower than before. I will support the formation of bipartisan oversight committee. It was a maneuver, not a reckoning. He stayed in the language of systems. Review, oversight, accountability. But nowhere did the word sorry appear. Nowhere did he acknowledge the oxygen tanks, the collapsed defenses, the little girl with the washcloth-wrapped inhaler. His defense wasn't denial. It was distance. Across from him, Crockett remained still. Her silence was no longer strategy. It was verdict. The aftermath. A nation awakened. Within minutes of the hearing's end, footage exploded across social media. Hashtag GreenSlushGate shot from a few dozen posts to trending nationwide in 20 minutes. She brought receipts. One user wrote, "No more hiding behind efficiency while kids choke." By noon, the video had reached 14 million views, subtitled in 5 languages by volunteers across Europe and Latin America. Then came the voice that shattered what little deniability was left. A former EPA administrator called into CNN Live. What Representative Crockett said was not only true, it barely scratched the surface. We were blocked from auditing these reallocation patterns because grants have been politically pre-cleared. That sentence was shared 28 million times in 8 hours. The investigation begins. By 7:14 p.m. Eastern, breaking news banners flashed across every network. House opens emergency investigation into environmental grant mismanagement in 6 states. Subpoenas were drafted, documents requested. Federal inspectors, long silenced, were reactivated. But behind the procedural language was something more volatile: fear. Because what Crockett had exposed wasn't just mishandling, it was betrayal. One by one, news crews descended on neighborhoods named in her testimony. In Baton Rouge, a mother held up a photo of her son's collapsed lung. "We were never told the funds were gone. We just stopped getting visits." Quiet insiders began stepping forward. Text messages confirming political pressure. Emails redlining communities that didn't fit funding optics. The letter that changed everything. Days later, as Crockett was named keynote speaker at the National Summit on Equitable Budgeting, a staffer approached with a plain white envelope for words written in pencil. "For Ms. Crockett, please." Inside was wide-ruled notebook paper with crayon hearts lining the top and bottom. The message was short. "Dear Ms. Crockett, thank you for fighting so we can breathe." Signed, Ava J., age 10, Bronx. Below was a drawing, 2 figures, one small with brown curls, one taller holding a microphone with a blue cape sweeping behind her, a sun in the corner, and a building labeled school with hearts floating above it like birds. Crockett stared at it for a long time. She had read internal memos, parsed audit logs, fought with logic and facts and fury. But this was the purest record of impact. Ava didn't write expecting recognition. She wrote because she could breathe a little easier, and someone finally said her breath mattered. The real lesson. What Jasmine Crockett proved in that chamber wasn't just about environmental funding or congressional oversight. It was about something deeper, more fundamental. She showed us that injustice doesn't always wear a uniform or carry a weapon. Sometimes it wears a suit, holds a spreadsheet, signs a denial with a pen that never trembles while crossing out a zip code. Sometimes injustice is polite, procedural, built into the structure itself. But she also showed us that justice doesn't emerge from committees or convenience. It must be forced into existence, wrestled into being, demanded by someone willing to lose everything so someone else can finally breathe. In that moment, with a crumpled photograph and a whistleblower file, Crockett didn't just confront a man. She confronted a system, and she cracked it wide open. Because the truth is this: power is real, but so is breath. Budgets are numbers, but justice is who gets to breathe. And in a world built to forget, remembering is revolutionary. Jasmine Crockett made us remember. And now, finally, we cannot look away. The budget war continues. The investigations expand. And somewhere in the Bronx, a little girl named Ava sleeps a little easier, knowing someone fought for her right to breathe. Because that's what real leadership looks like. Not perfect, not polished, but present when it matters most.